That kind of sorrow becomes an indelible part of your psyche. I held the generous, strong, beautiful hand of my first wife, Cassie.
He played the world's coolest spy, but behind the charm and tuxedos is a story far more gripping than any Bond film. From a childhood marked by abandonment to losing the love of his life, and then his daughter to the same cruel disease, Pierce Brosnan's real life is a roller coaster of pain, resilience, and unexpected triumphs. What pushed him to the edge, and how did he survive it all? Pierce Brosnan was born on May 16, 1953, in Drogheda, County Louth, Ireland. He was the only child of May and Thomas Brosnan. His father, a carpenter by trade, left the family when Pierce was still an infant. The absence was so complete that Pierce later admitted he couldn't recall his father's face, voice, or presence. From the start, life didn't offer him much stability. His mother, May, tried to hold things together as best she could. She worked as a nurse, but by 1957, when Pierce was just 4 years old, she made a difficult decision. In search of better opportunities, she moved to London, leaving her son behind in Ireland. What was meant to be a temporary separation turned into 7 long years. During that time, Pierce was passed between relatives. He first lived with his grandparents in Navan, then with an aunt and uncle in Trim. Each move meant adjusting to a new home, new routines, and new people. He attended multiple schools and never stayed in one place long enough to feel settled. That kind of constant change can be tough for any child, and Pierce learned early on how to keep his head down, stay quiet, and simply observe the world around him. Teachers saw potential in him. He was intelligent and quick to learn, but also noted that he seemed withdrawn. Often he'd stare out the window, lost in thought. He was physically present, but mentally somewhere else, always a little disconnected. In 1964, things took a turn. At the age of 11, Pierce was finally reunited with his mother when she brought him to live in Scotland. She had remarried a man named William Carmichael, who worked in a factory. For a boy who had grown up with very little consistency, this new arrangement was both a relief and a challenge. He was happy to be with his mother again, but there was also confusion and frustration. Now there was a new man in their lives, someone who wasn't his father, but was supposed to take on that role. William, to his credit, didn't try to force anything. He was patient and understanding. Over time, he taught Pierce small things: how to fish, how to fix things, how to trust again. That slow-building relationship gave Pierce some sense of security, something he hadn't felt in years. Then, something unexpected happened that would change the direction of his life entirely. One evening, William took Pierce to the cinema. It was 1964, and the film was Goldfinger, starring Sean Connery as James Bond. For many, it was just an action film. But for young Pierce, it was a revelation. Bond represented everything Pierce felt he wasn't: strong, composed, and in control. Watching that film ignited something inside him. From that moment on, he knew he wanted to be part of that world in some way, even if he didn't quite know how. By the time he was 16, Pierce made a bold decision. He dropped out of school and enrolled at St. Martin's School of Art in London. He didn't have much money or a clear career plan, but he was passionate about painting. He admired artists like Francis Bacon and Lucian Freud and was determined to make a life in the arts. His time at art school was not glamorous. He survived on toast and tea, while many of his classmates came from much wealthier backgrounds. But Pierce didn't let that discourage him. He was focused, committed, and quietly driven to prove himself. Acting wasn't even on his radar yet. His world revolved around illustration and design. But fate had a different path in mind. In 1971, while still studying art, Pierce happened upon a theater workshop in South London. It was pure chance. He saw someone practicing fire eating and was intrigued. Rather than walk away, he asked if he could try it himself. That random moment led to an invitation to join the group. Though he'd never acted before, the group saw something in him. He had a natural stage presence and an openness to risk. Two things that can't be easily taught. That initial step into the world of performance lit a new fire. Suddenly, acting felt like the right fit. Not long after, Pierce was accepted into the Drama Centre London. From 1973 to 1976, he trained there full-time. The program was intense. More than half the students dropped out. The instructors were known for being brutally honest and extremely demanding. They tore students down in order to build them back up. Pierce, now in his early 20s, was determined to stick it out. He worked side jobs to pay his tuition, studied Shakespeare, and even trained in mime and circus performance. The training cost £1,200 a year, a significant amount at the time, but Pierce treated it as an investment in his future. He never missed a class and rarely complained. In 1976, all that hard work started to pay off. He landed a role in a stage production of Wait Until Dark. It was a psychological thriller, and his character was intentionally unsettling. The director noted that Pierce had a kind of cold intensity that worked well for the part. Audiences took notice. He wasn't just a pretty face. There was substance behind the charm. A year later, he took on a difficult role in The Red Devil Battery Sign, a lesser-known Tennessee Williams play. The production had flopped in the US, but the London version received much more favorable reviews. Critics praised Brosnan's performance, calling him a fresh and compelling new talent. Film roles began to follow, though they were small at first. In 1980, he had a blink-and-you-miss-it role in The Mirror Cracked, a mystery film starring Elizabeth Taylor. He was on screen for less than 30 seconds and earned just £50. Still, it was his first taste of film acting, and it mattered. That same year, he appeared in The Long Good Friday, alongside Bob Hoskins and Helen Mirren. He played a silent IRA hitman, another minor part, but one that added to his growing resume. The film didn't do well initially, but it later gained cult status, and Pierce was slowly, steadily making a name for himself. By 1982, Pierce Brosnan was still relatively unknown outside of the UK. He had done a few TV roles and stage performances, but nothing major. Then he auditioned for a part on a new NBC show called Remington Steele. It was supposed to be a one-scene role, a murder victim. But something about him stood out. The casting director saw more than just another actor. They saw charm, screen presence, and a natural confidence that couldn't be faked. So instead of casting him as a victim, they called him back to audition for the lead role. That decision changed everything. Originally, Remington Steele was meant to feature a seasoned American con man in his 50s. Pierce was 29, Irish, and unknown to American audiences. But the producers took a gamble. Over 200 actors had auditioned, most of them better known than him. Still, Pierce won the role. His Irish accent was nearly a deal-breaker. Network executives feared US viewers wouldn't accept a non-American lead. But once the pilot aired, all doubts faded. Pierce brought something new to the screen. He was cool, clever, and mysterious. The audience loved it. Remington Steele premiered on October 1st, 1982. Right out of the gate, it was a success. In its first year, over 15 million people tuned in each week. The show would eventually air in more than 80 countries and generate hundreds of millions of dollars for NBC. At the time, Cassandra had recently gone through a divorce. She had 2 children from her previous marriage, Charlotte and Christopher. But when she and Pierce began their relationship, it didn't take long before they were living together in Wimbledon, London. Pierce, who had grown up without a consistent family of his own, found comfort and belonging in this new chapter. On December 27, 1980, Pierce and Cassandra got married. From that moment, it was no longer just about him and Cassandra. He stepped into the role of stepfather without hesitation. In 1986, after Cassandra's ex-husband passed away from a heart attack, Pierce formally adopted Charlotte and Christopher. They took his surname and became a family in every sense. Pierce once said he had no idea how to be a father at first. He described it as going from being just Pierce to suddenly becoming daddy. But he embraced the responsibility. He was driven by the need to give his children the kind of stable and loving upbringing he had missed out on. In 1983, he and Cassandra welcomed a son together, naming him Sean. The family now numbered 5, and life felt grounded. Even as his career was developing, Pierce always placed his family first. Cassandra's support was unwavering. She believed in him, encouraged his dreams, and even played a small role in helping him get noticed by the producers of the James Bond films. She herself had played a Bond girl, List, alongside Roger Moore in the 1981 film For Your Eyes Only. It was during the filming of that movie that Pierce met Albert Cubby Broccoli, the influential Bond producer. Cassandra saw something in Pierce that others were beginning to see too, and she never stopped pushing him to pursue the role of 007. But fate had a cruel twist in store. In 1987, while Pierce was filming The Deceivers in India, Cassandra began to feel unwell. What initially seemed like a passing illness turned out to be something far more serious. After flying back to London for tests, she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. It was aggressive and advanced. From that point on, everything changed. Pierce described it as being thrown into a battle they never expected. Cassandra underwent multiple surgeries, 8 in total, and endured 18 months of chemotherapy. Her hair fell out, her body weakened. But through it all, she remained strong and in control. She made her own treatment decisions and faced each day with determination. Pierce stayed by her side throughout the ordeal. He called himself the quiet partner, always present, often helpless, but never absent. Their young son, Sean, was just a child and would sometimes pretend to be a doctor, trying to help in the only way he knew how. It was heartbreaking. Cassandra's mother had also died of ovarian cancer, making it clear that the disease had a genetic component. That realization brought an added layer of fear, especially for their daughter, Charlotte. Pierce began to speak out about the importance of genetic testing and early detection. It was already too late for Cassandra, but he hoped that sharing their experience might help others. By the end of 1991, Cassandra's condition had worsened. She chose to stay at home rather than be hooked up to machines in a hospital. She wanted dignity in her final days. One night, as they lay in bed, she turned to Pierce and told him not to worry, that it was just a life winding down. That moment stayed with him. On December 28, 1991, one day after their wedding anniversary, Cassandra passed away. She was 43 years old. Pierce and her son Christopher were with her at the time. Charlotte, who was studying acting in London, couldn't get there in time but spoke to her mother by phone shortly before the end. It was a devastating loss. Just days after Christmas, instead of celebrating, Pierce found himself planning a funeral. Telling Sean, who was only 8 years old at the time, that his mother was gone was one of the hardest things Pierce ever had to do. He later said it was the first time he truly felt grief, real, overwhelming grief that didn't let up. Still, life moved forward, as it always does. And despite the pain, Pierce continued to work and raise his children. He often credited Cassandra for shaping who he became, saying she was in every fiber of his being. Then in 1994, a professional milestone finally arrived. After years of speculation, close calls, and missed chances, Pierce Brosnan was officially cast as James Bond. It was a personal and emotional moment. Cassandra had always believed he was right for the role. She had even joked that he would be Bond one day. Now that dream had become reality, though she wasn't there to see it. His debut as 007 came in GoldenEye, released in 1995. The stakes were high, not just for Pierce, but for the entire franchise. MGM was facing financial trouble, and Bond hadn't been on screen since 1989. The studio had gone through multiple directors, and the production budget had ballooned to around $60 million. There was a lot riding on the success of the film, but GoldenEye delivered. It earned over $350 million worldwide and re-established Bond as a cultural force. One of the film's most memorable scenes, a tank chase through St. Petersburg, reportedly cost $8 million to shoot. Pierce did 90% of his own stunts, including a bungee jump off a 220-meter dam in Switzerland. The stunt was so risky that insurance companies refused to cover it. The release of GoldenEye coincided almost exactly with the 30th anniversary of Sean Connery's final official Bond film, Diamonds Are Forever. In many ways, the new film was a tribute to the past while setting a new direction for the future. It introduced Bond to a new generation of fans, and Pierce became an international star almost overnight. In 1997, Tomorrow Never Dies followed. By this time, Pierce was still grieving Cassandra's loss, but he channeled that emotional depth into his performance. The film was a commercial success, though its production was challenging. One chase sequence, supposedly set in Saigon, required the construction of a full Vietnamese street set in England at a cost of $12 million. Then came The World Is Not Enough in 1999. It featured the longest opening sequence in Bond history, 14 minutes of action that pushed the limits of what the franchise had done before. The film also broke ground by introducing Bond's first female main villain. One of its most ambitious stunts involved blowing up part of a mock oil pipeline using over 100 gallons of gasoline to create a fireball visible from 10 miles away. In 2002, Pierce returned as Bond in Die Another Day, which marked the franchise's 40th anniversary. The production went all out, including a $300,000 invisible Aston Martin and an elaborate ice palace set built in Iceland. But behind the scenes, not everything was smooth. During a parasailing stunt, Pierce was pulled under 30-foot waves and ended up in the hospital with hypothermia. Despite the challenges, Pierce's tenure as Bond was widely successful. His 4 Bond films grossed more than $1.4 billion combined. He even beat Sean Connery for Best Actor at the Saturn Awards in 1996, a rare moment where a current Bond outshone a former one. Steven Spielberg, impressed by Pierce's performance in GoldenEye, even approached him to play Indiana Jones, a role Pierce turned down to stay committed to Bond. In 2004, Pierce was in the Bahamas, filming After the Sunset. He was 51 years old, in top physical condition, and still riding high from the success of Die Another Day, which had become the highest-grossing Bond film at the time, pulling in over $430 million globally. He had started pitching ideas for the next Bond film, what would have been his 5th outing as 007. He was confident, creative, and invested in the future of the franchise. Then the phone rang. At 2:47 p.m., he received a call from the producers. It was short, just 47 seconds. They thanked him for his work, told him he was a great James Bond, and ended the call. That was it. No explanation, no warning. Pierce Brosnan was no longer James Bond. What made the news even harder to process was how well his Bond films had performed financially and critically. He had become a global ambassador for the brand, done much of his own stunt work, and brought a modern edge to the role. Still, the studio had made its decision. They wanted a younger actor, a fresh start. Daniel Craig would take on the role next in Casino Royale. Behind the scenes, it later emerged that the producers had been screen testing other actors for nearly 2 years, while still publicly supporting Brosnan. That discovery added a layer of betrayal. It wasn't just about being replaced. It was about how it happened. He hadn't been given the chance to prepare or even say goodbye. The fallout was swift. Within 3 days of the phone call, 3 major movie deals evaporated. Studios assumed he was no longer bankable. Internal communications reportedly described him as being too Bond, suggesting that his success in the role had become a limitation. His asking price for films dropped significantly, from $12 million to $3 million. He had to let go of several staff members, and emotionally, he hit a wall. His children saw him cry when the Casino Royale trailer was released. For the first time in years, he was adrift. Professionally, he was facing rejection. But personally, he had a lifeline: Keely Shea Smith. They had met back in April 1994, just a few months before he was officially announced as Bond. The meeting happened at a beach party in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. Keely, a journalist and former model, wasn't impressed by fame or status. What drew her to Pierce was who he was at his core, his warmth, humor, and sincerity. They spoke for hours that night, and within 3 weeks, Pierce flew her out to meet his children. 6 months later, she moved in. Their relationship, which started quietly and without fanfare, quickly became the foundation of his new life. In 2001, they were married in Ireland at Ballintubber Abbey, a 13th century church steeped in history. The ceremony was intimate but elegant. Only 100 guests attended, including close friends like Judi Dench and Liam Neeson. Pierce wore a traditional Irish kilt, and the couple reportedly spent around $2.3 million on the event. It wasn't about showing off. It was about celebrating something that had already stood the test of time. Together, Pierce and Keeley had 2 sons, Dylan and Paris. He often spoke about how fatherhood had changed him. After losing his own father so early, and later becoming a stepfather and then a single parent, having a stable, loving family felt like both a gift and a responsibility. He was protective, present, and deeply involved in his children's lives. But life had another test waiting. In 2013, tragedy returned in a cruelly familiar form. His daughter Charlotte, the same girl he had adopted in 1986, was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, the same disease that had taken her mother Cassandra 22 years earlier. For Pierce, it was more than devastating. It was history repeating itself in the most painful way. Charlotte fought the disease with strength and determination. She went through years of treatment, trying everything doctors recommended. In June 2013, she married her longtime partner, Alex Smith. The wedding was small and filled with love, held just 2 weeks before her death. She wanted her 2 children, 15-year-old Isabella and 8-year-old Lucas, to witness the importance of love and commitment, even in the face of uncertainty. On June 28, 2013, Charlotte passed away in London at the age of 41. She was surrounded by her husband, her children, and her brothers, Christopher and Sean. The timing was almost too painful to comprehend. Her mother had died at 43. Her grandmother from the same disease. Now Charlotte. 3 generations lost to a silent killer that often goes undetected until it's too late. At a public fundraiser in 2014, Pierce stood on stage and spoke candidly about his grief. He described holding Charlotte's hand, just as he had held Cassandra's 2 decades earlier. His voice broke as he said, "Ovarian cancer has taken the lives of my wife and daughter. It is an insidious disease. The pain is immense, the grief unrelenting." Through it all, Keeley stood by him. Friends said she became his anchor, the one constant when everything else felt uncertain. But the pressure on their family didn't stop. Around the same time, their son Christopher began struggling with personal issues. After Cassandra's death, Christopher had shown promise in the film industry, working behind the scenes on several of Pierce's Bond films. But the grief caught up with him. By the mid-1990s, Christopher was facing legal issues. He was fined for drunk driving in 1996, then jailed for 3 months the following year for a similar offense. As the years went on, he fell deeper into addiction. He was arrested for heroin possession in 2012 and became part of a scene that was a world away from Hollywood. Pierce, who had once fought to keep his family together, was watching another child disappear into pain. Christopher's life remained largely out of the public eye for years, but in 2024, he was seen in public for the first time in decades. Paparazzi caught him leaving a shop in London. He looked thin and older than his years, alone but alive. It was a small glimpse into a life that had once held promise and had been derailed by trauma and addiction. Meanwhile, Keeley was quietly fighting a different kind of battle. Over the years, she had faced constant criticism from tabloids about her weight and appearance. The media often compared her current look to photos from her modeling days, publishing cruel before and after spreads. But Keeley remained dignified. In 2024, she revealed she had lost over 100 pounds, not through surgery or shortcuts, but through regular walking, swimming, and eating healthy food. She credited her success to self-respect and gratitude. In a post that quickly went viral, she wrote, "This is for all my body has given and accomplished in 60 years." That same year, she and Pierce celebrated their 23rd wedding anniversary. 31 years since they first met. Pierce posted a tribute calling her his North, South, East, and West, a phrase that touched thousands of fans. Keeley replied, "You are the finest, loveliest, tenderest person I have ever known." After Charlotte's death in 2013, Pierce was once again thrown into a familiar cycle of pain. Losing a child is something no parent can prepare for, especially not when the cause is the same illness that already took your partner. It felt like history repeating itself in the most painful way. But even through the heartbreak, Pierce didn't disappear from public life. Instead, he used the tragedy as motivation. He became more outspoken about the dangers of ovarian cancer, advocating for better research, earlier diagnosis, and more public awareness. He took the grief that could have broken him and turned it into purpose. At the Stand Up to Cancer fundraiser in 2014, he spoke openly about holding both Cassandra and Charlotte's hands as they passed away. His speech was raw and emotional, and it resonated with people around the world. Pierce wasn't just a Hollywood star, he had become a symbol of resilience. But while he found strength in advocacy, the pain didn't go away. The impact of Charlotte's death rippled through the family. Pierce became even more protective of his grandchildren, Isabella and Lucas. He stepped in to provide stability, knowing from experience how hard it is to lose a parent so young. Charlotte had been just 15 when Cassandra was diagnosed, and now her own daughter, Isabella, was the same age when she lost her mother. While Pierce remained a supportive grandfather, his other children coped with the loss in different ways. Christopher, who had already been struggling with addiction, continued to drift further from the life he once had. Once involved in film production, working on some of Pierce's Bond movies, he slowly disappeared from the spotlight. Over the years, he was arrested several times and fell into serious drug use, including heroin and GHB. For much of the 2010s and early 2020s, Christopher stayed out of the public eye. But in June 2024, he was photographed in London for the first time in nearly 2 decades. At 51 years old, he looked gaunt, walking alone outside a local shop. The photo was quietly heartbreaking. While Pierce rarely spoke publicly about Christopher's situation, it was clear the family had endured not just public tragedy, but private struggles as well. At the same time, Pierce's wife Keeley was navigating her own challenges. For years, she had been the subject of media scrutiny, often targeted by tabloids for her appearance. Cruel headlines criticized her weight, and social media trolls often compared her current photos to her modeling days. But Keeley never responded with bitterness. Instead, she focused on her health, her family, and her self-worth. In 2024, Keeley shared that she had lost 100 pounds through consistent exercise, healthy eating, and a focus on wellness. There were no shortcuts, just patience and commitment. She said the transformation was not about fitting a beauty standard, but about honoring her body and everything it had been through. In her words, it was about gratitude for all my body has given and accomplished in 60 years. Pierce stood by her the entire time. In a widely shared post, he wrote, "I love every curve of her body. She is the most beautiful woman in my eyes. She gave me our 5 children." His words resonated not because they were grand, but because they were simple, clear, and filled with truth. It was a reminder that real love isn't shaken by age or appearances. In August 2024, the couple celebrated their 23rd wedding anniversary. They had met more than 30 years earlier and had been through everything together, from international fame to unimaginable loss. At their anniversary, Pierce referred to Keeley as his North, South, East, and West. She responded by calling him the finest, loveliest, tenderest person I have ever known. Their bond was still strong, perhaps stronger than ever. In April 2025, the two were seen together attending George Clooney's Broadway debut. Keeley wore a classic black lace dress, and Pierce looked as sharp as ever. They appeared calm and content, two people who had weathered life's storms and were still standing side by side. Professionally, Pierce had also remained active. In 2022, he took on the role of Dr. Fate in the superhero film Black Adam, starring alongside Dwayne Johnson. The director praised Pierce for bringing a unique blend of power and calm to the character. It was another example of his ability to reinvent himself and stay relevant in an ever-changing industry. Even in his 70s, Pierce was still seen as one of Hollywood's most charismatic and capable actors. But beyond film, he had become something more, a global advocate for causes close to his heart. He had been a UNICEF ambassador since 2001 and had worked with Greenpeace for many years. He had spoken out against nuclear testing and environmental destruction. He had even boycotted the GoldenEye premiere in France to protest French nuclear activity in the South Pacific. His activism wasn't for show. It came from a real place. When Charlotte was sick, he said he would have done anything, made any call, traveled anywhere, begged anyone, if it would have saved her life. He couldn't, and that haunted him. But he made a choice, to keep trying, to keep speaking, to help others where he could. That blend of personal pain and public purpose had become part of who he was. Through interviews, speeches, and appearances, he kept telling his story, not to relive the trauma, but to let others know they weren't alone. Grief, he said, changes everything. It rewires the way you see the world, but it can also open your heart in ways you never expected. At 71, Pierce Brosnan had lived a life filled with both triumph and heartbreak. He had risen from a troubled childhood, lost his wife and daughter to the same disease, endured betrayal in his career, and faced the personal challenges of parenthood and aging. But he had also found great love, built a meaningful career, and turned his experiences into something larger than himself. For all the glamour associated with his name, what people remembered most about him wasn't the tuxedos or the fast cars. It was the quiet dignity with which he faced life's hardest moments. It was the honesty in his voice when he talked about loss, and the warmth in his eyes when he spoke about his family. It was the way he loved, the way he kept showing up, and the way he used his platform not just for fame, but for good. He once said, "You have to keep moving forward, otherwise you're just standing still in grief." And that's what he did, day by day, year by year. He kept moving, keep loving, keep living, not as James Bond, not as a movie star, but as a father, husband, grandfather, and human being.